the conversation after this game was not whether or not Notre Dame, what are their bowl chances after this loss? How does the rest of the season look? How's the team going to be affected? It was, is Jimmy Clausen's Heisman candidacy still intact? I think the answer is a resounding no. You can't lose 2 games in this day and age as a Heisman candidate and still win it. And I'm sure someone's going to be a wise guy and email me and pick out the 1967 guy that did it. But Jimmy Clausen Heisman, can we just ignore that as way outside of the mainstream of opinion here?
Oh, I mean, definitely. And we got to remember NBC has a big rooting interest in this because they own the rights to NBC football, and so the more hype around their team there is, the better. And there will be a lot of naysayers out there saying that this is just the media hyping Notre Dame. But honestly, it's true. Jimmy Clausen is a good quarterback, but he's not the best player in college football. He's far from it. He's got good skills, but where are the results for the past couple of years? So let's not talk Heisman for Jimmy Clausen quite yet.
Okay, we won't. Now we just did. But let's keep it moving, David. Let's talk about another interesting and heart-stopping game: Florida and Arkansas. Of course, everyone's favorite quarterback, Michigan transfer Ryan Mallett, leading the Arkansas Razorbacks to a near upset of Florida. Do you really think that Florida's struggles here against an Arkansas team that's been pretty good the past couple of years warranted Alabama jumping them for the #1 spot in the top 25?
No, I don't really think it did. However, as you'll see later in the show, I'm not quite convinced that Florida's the better team out of the two. But I think you have to go with the team who started the year #1, the team who's blown out quite a few teams. And, they didn't look good, but they came through in the clutch. The whole offense looked good on the last drive. Tim Tebow looked like the hype machine that ESPN makes him out to be. So,
he definitely lived up to the billing here and came through in the clutch, as is to be expected. Of course, last week, Florida going to LSU, going to Death Valley, Tiger Stadium, winning in that game where Tebow was coming back from that concussion. And Scott, let's keep moving it along. An upset later that night, Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech's Beamer ball luck doesn't quite come through in the clutch. ACC, 2 thumbs down. I know we've had this conversation privately many times, but so Virginia Tech has 2 losses, obviously not in the national championship conversation anymore, but how bad is the ACC, really? Those are 2 ranked teams, but still.
It's a difficult way to compare parity to just not being good, but it seems for me personally, anytime I really trust an ACC team to really be a national power, they lose. If I remember correctly, I haven't looked this up, but last year, no ACC team had less than 2 losses in conference. And so it's just these teams cannibalize themselves because there's no really good team, and there's a bunch of mediocre teams. So there's some decent football teams in there. Georgia Tech is pretty good, as we saw last week. Virginia Tech still isn't a bad team. They took Alabama right down to the wire. Miami's beaten Oklahoma, but there's just not a very good football team in this conference, and that's what we've seen the past couple of years.
And of course, Florida State destroyed BYU in an out-of-conference game. And let's move the conversation now to the BYU game this upcoming week, David. BYU, TCU. You're going to see a BYU hype video here as we're discussing this. It makes me excited about Cougars football. It's just there's smoke rising off these players. They are fully invested. Holy crap! I don't know what more you want from a hype video. Band of brothers. They're all pulling, fully invested in the same direction. David, does TCU even stand a chance when they play BYU this weekend? Of course, TCU undefeated, number 8 in the BCS.
I think both the teams are pretty evenly matched. It comes down to home field advantage, even though Provo, Utah may not be the most hostile of environments. I still give the slight edge to BYU, and I think Mountain West, it's a pretty good conference, I have to say.
Of course, David was talking earlier, Scott, about Mountain West and BYU, the Mountain West and the WAC merging and creating a non-BCS super conference. That actually might be interesting, but can we really take either of these 2 teams? I think we take BYU seriously, but they have the 1 loss. Can we take TCU seriously with only this win over BYU as a big gold star on their resume?
Well, we were just talking about how bad we think the ACC is. BYU got destroyed by Florida State. It was not even close. If I remember right, it was a 20-point victory or something like that. You can't take BYU seriously when I guess they beat Oklahoma, so that was a big win. But maybe that was a fluke if you're going to lose that badly to a team like Florida State, who's really been struggling this year as on a whole. So we'll have to see how TCU, they'll play BYU, they'll play Utah because they're also in their conference. So we'll see. Maybe if they're resounding in both of those victories, we can say this is a team that's really is very good. But sometimes you got to step back and look at the resume. Maybe the Mountain West isn't quite as good as some people are making them out to be.
All right, we definitely want to spend a lot of time on the Penn State game, so I'll make this quick, guys. But Tulsa, Boise State was on Thursday night. Boise State barely pulls it out, David. Does that disqualify Boise State, an undefeated Boise State team, from being in the national championship game? Or do you think that every team needs to have at least one or two near letdowns?
I think that it doesn't quite disqualify them, but I think if there's a third team left out, it's certainly going to be Boise State. I mean, you look at Cincinnati has the capacity to go undefeated, assuming that Tony Pike stays healthy and actually plays next week. But I just think they're the fourth or fifth team right now down the line.
Even some one-loss BCS teams perhaps sneaking in front of Boise State, Scott.
For sure. Let me run this down. Cincinnati and Iowa undefeated, so they'll move ahead of Boise State because they're going to play better quality teams, so they'll be more impressive to the voters with the wins. You have USC, Texas, Florida, Alabama. If any of those teams, well, USC already has one loss, but if any of those three teams lose, they could still be bumped up ahead of Boise State because of the strength of schedule and whatnot, and just the way that the voters will look at it. So especially, there's no way Boise State makes national championship game, in my opinion, just based off what we saw against Tulsa and also just the way the system works. There's no way.
Of course, their gold star the win over Oregon in the first week of the season. We have to go to commercial break, but on the other side, we're going to talk Penn State. Big game. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Varsity Blue. Alex Prasad, David Now, Scott Wagner, running out of time, but just like Tate Forrest today, we are better under pressure, and we are not at all nervous. Talking Penn State right now. Penn State, of course, coming to the Big House, guys. This Saturday game to end the entire season on right here. It's been building up. Michigan, of course, studying footage of that just very intimidating Penn State team. Of course, for 2 weeks now. I'm sure they'd not look at much, if any, film of Delaware State. Let's first start with Michigan on offense, Scott. What does Michigan need to do when they have the ball to beat this very good Penn State defense? The top scoring defense, the top total yardage defense in the Big Ten.
Yeah, 8.7 points a game Penn State is giving up. That's going to be difficult. I think the key is going to be the Michigan offensive line playing well. Hopefully, if Molk moves back in, controlling the running game and controlling the line of scrimmage is going to be very big for this Michigan football team. They're a fantastic running team, and you got to play to your strengths. And the strengths of this team are Brandon Miner and Carlos Brown, who are both hopefully more healthy after sitting this week out. So if Michigan's offensive line can really play well, I think on offense they're going to have a good chance to score a few points.
And do you agree with that, David?
I do. I think that Michigan just has to play the way they did against Notre Dame, play the way they did earlier in the season rather than a Michigan State type performance. I mean, you look at Penn State's defense, and the best team they played so far is Iowa offensively. So I think Michigan gives them a test they haven't seen yet.
Of course, Eastern Illinois, Akron, Temple, Syracuse, the very robust Penn State non-conference schedule. Running out of time, guys. Michigan on defense, definitely you're going to have their hands full. 4 different receivers for Penn State with over 20 catches. Evan Royster, one of the best running backs in the Big Ten. He's second right now in overall rushing yards. And, of course, Darrell Clark, a very, very good guy as well. So that Michigan defense is going to be because they have their hands full, especially on these long passes as we're seeing Michigan get torched against Iowa. So running out of time,